SB number 412 by Middleton, relating to affirmative defenses to prosecution for certain offenses involving materials or conduct that is obscene or otherwise harmful to children.
The chair recognizes Mr. Patterson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill that removes affirmative defenses to prosecution for sharing harmful materials with children and for sexual performances of a child. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Ms. Flores, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I do.
The gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you for accepting questions on third reading. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So are you concerned at all about the vague definition of obscenity and harmful contact in our penal code? And for instance, who is deciding what is patently offensive to community standards?
I'm not concerned at all about the definitions in the penal code. Those are community standards, and that would be a law enforcement decision.
Okay. And what about, does this bill seek to limit sex education in schools?
No.
Nope. Okay, so I guess so they'll be able to continue.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would view any of the TEKS or anything that is in the curriculum of a public school about anatomy and physiology or biology or any actual scientific classes about any of that stuff. I don't think that that is an issue at all. I think what we're talking about here is, a perversion and extreme content that's got to meet all three of these criteria laid out in this bill. It's got to be pretty extreme, and unfortunately, we have seen some extreme examples in our public schools, and I do believe that it would affect some of those.
Okay. Oh, so would there be an exemption for certain educational materials? You just explained which ones wouldn't be, but
No, there is no exemption for educational purposes to share harmful materials with minors.
but in sex education classes?
I don't believe that that would be harmful materials as defined under the law.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Gonzalez, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield?
The gentleman yield for questions.
I do.
The gentleman yields.
So I see that you removed certain affirmative defenses, right? And you left a couple of exceptions that are, I guess, defenses still.
Law enforcement and judicial would remain, and unfortunately, I wish that we could remove all of them, but unfortunately, there are circumstances where something's happened to a child and a law enforcement officer or judicial person would have to share materials with the child to get their testimony.
But if in the statute, it originally, or as it is right now, it says that these are bona fide, right, uses whether it's used in a medical situation or in an educational situation. So these are folks who are using, right, certain visual aids or what have you in a professional manner as part of their job. And so why remove them and put them in a situation that makes them potentially open to liability? Or
I just don't believe that there is any bona fide reason at all. I think that the original law in the 70s was very poorly written, and I don't believe that there is any bona fide reason to share harmful materials with a child unless it's for a judicial or law enforcement purpose.
So is that subjective? What somebody would think is harmful?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Is that subjective?
Oh, I don't believe so.
So, okay, so what, so because it says community, right, community standards, I believe is, people have different, some people find things offensive and some people don't. So, to me, that's subjective, right? What's offensive to one person may not be offensive to the other.
Yeah,
correct?
we have an entire chapter in the penal code about obscenity, and so, I don't believe that it's subjective. There are definitions in the penal code. I chose not to read all of the definitions yesterday because I don't think that it's appropriate in the setting necessarily, but there are very specific definitions in the penal code. And I will also mention that this test of what is considered obscene content, there's existing Supreme Court precedent from 1957, from 1973, and from 1985 that addresses this. And so this is, for anyone that's an attorney or anyone wanting to prosecute these cases, there's a lot of precedent on the books to manage this situation.
And so, included with, the what's eliminated or what you're taking out of the statute is you're taking away the doctors', psychiatrists, and psychologists' ability to operate and treat their patients within a certain standard of care. Do you have a medical background to be able to determine that?
No, I think that when this law was written in the 1970s, it was based on a pro-pedophile study that says that babies are sexual beings from the time they're born. And there was a number of laws passed across the nation that wanted to be able to use sexual performances of a child in psychological or psychiatric purposes.
I mean, I think we can all agree that we don't support that or don't promote that type of behavior. Folks that do, right, are creeps, like you, I think,
Yeah.
like you said yesterday. My concern is just, when it's folks who are medical professionals, right? Let's say they're treating a patient. Let's say they're going through puberty, right? And they're asking questions because maybe they can't ask their parents, right? And it could require, right, maybe some kind of visual aid of some sort. That, I remember whenever I was in school and we took sex ed, right? I mean, there were some visuals there. I mean, it wasn't like a actual human, but we did study the anatomy of a man and a woman, right? And so with that, I mean, so my concern is that what if someone feels like that's harmful material? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I understand your concern. I hear your concern. I just don't believe that anything that is truly based on anatomy and physiology or biology would be deemed harmful materials under the law. I mean, it's got to be patently offensive to the prevailing standards in the adult community, not in the child community, in the adult community. It's got to be without redeeming social value, and it's got to be, and it has to appeal to the prurient interest of a minor in sex, nudity, or excretion. So, I mean, it's got to fit all three prongs of this test to meet that. And I just don't believe in any scenario that a medical doctor would need to provide a child with material that would meet all three of these criteria that are all tested through the Supreme Court. I don't believe that a chart showing what happens to your body as you mature would fit into this definition at all. And I'd be happy for that to be put in the journal for legislative intent.
Okay. I mean, and I agree that if material meets those three prongs that you just mentioned, it should not be, right. It should not be shown to kids or what have you. But shouldn't a person, whether it's an educator, a medical professional, have the opportunity to, right, to have that affirmative defense to prove that whatever material, right, that somebody is claiming that is harmful, does not meet those three prongs, right? That's the whole purpose of having an affirmative defense, is so somebody can prove if somebody's alleging some kind of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree because I think that that they are already covered. The medical community is already covered because, I mean, let's just talk about prurient interest. I mean, just one of the three prongs. Prurient interest is a shameful or morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion. A shameful or morbid interest. I don't believe that any anatomy and physiology or biology or chemistry or anything else that's going on in the scientific or medical community that would need to be shared with a child to treat that child would be shameful or morbid interest in these things. And that's just one of the three prongs. Again, it's got to meet all three, and that's just one of the three.
So, I mean, why not allow somebody, again, right, to be able to, because you have to show, when you I guess, in response, you said you have an affirmative defense available to you. I mean, you still have to prove, you have to prove that, right? It's not just, if somebody just gets off scot-free, right? Versus keeping them in let's say, in a civil lawsuit or what have you, or a criminal, situation. It allows somebody to, right, to get out of it if they're truly not, liable, under a certain part of the code that somebody's alleging that they are.
Yeah, I just don't believe that doctors are going to be prosecuted for talking to kids about puberty. Okay.
And you mentioned earlier that there were some situations in Texas. Can you give me some examples of those, of why this change is necessary and why we need to make these changes here in Texas?
Well, I think we need to make this change to protect our kids. I think that this is a law that never should have been on the books. I think it's embarrassing that it's been on the books for 50 years for all of us.
But sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
But you mentioned that there specifically that, I think when Ms. Flores was asking you some questions earlier, specific schools here in Texas. Can you tell me what those specific
Yeah,
situations
absolutely. I
are?
mean, I think that there's a broad range of materials that have been shared in the public school setting that I believe would be considered harmful materials. I don't think that every single book that I have fought has necessarily fit into this category. I don't believe that every book that would meet the requirements of HB 900 passed by this body last session would meet that. In fact, that's specifically why I didn't use the definition in HB 900, because I thought that it was a little bit too broad versus what I tried to do in that bill specifically. But there have been books that are radically, extremely pervasively vulgar and obscene that have been in our public schools. And I do believe that some of those materials would get caught up in this, and I don't believe that any educator should be shielded by the law if they're going to provide harmful materials to a child.
So this is about books then, right? Mainly?
No,
Is that-
ma'am. There's
no?
actually two. There's actually two sections of this bill. One is about harmful materials,
Yes.
which could include books, but could include other things. The other section is about the sexual performance of a child, and so this is a wide-ranging issue,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, it puts educators and those in the scientific and medical
Yeah, I mean,
community
yeah, that's what I was gonna
on the same standard that anyone else in society would have if they want to show harmful materials to a child. The regular person walking down the street, working at the gas station, can't show these materials to a child without facing consequences in the penal code. Why on earth would we exempt a teacher and shield the teacher from the law, or the doctor or the psychiatrist or whatever from the law for sharing these materials that the attendant at the gas station can't share with the child without going to jail? It make sense.
So just to be clear, my questions are aimed at the first part of your bill, not
Sure.
on the portion of sexual performance of a child. It's mainly
Sure.
just that top part. So the language in here, it also refers to right, sale, distribution, display, right, and if you go further down in the code, it says that a person distributes, exhibits, or possesses for sale. When it says possesses for sale, could that include something like or intended to distribute, right? Could that just be like one book, or could that just be? I mean, does it have to be a certain amount of items that would give rise to that intent to possess for sale? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I believe. Well, let me answer it, then you tell me. You can clarify if it doesn't. So my understanding is that one material, each individual material would have to meet the standards to qualify for harmful material. So if that's one piece of material, or if that's 1,000 pieces of material, each individual material would have to qualify for the harmful material standard.
Okay. So for example, I mean, let's say it's like a pamphlet or something at a doctor's office or something like that. Even if it's just one pamphlet versus it being a stack of like 10, is that it would still fall under that, right? Whether it's one or whether it's 10, right?
I think what this law aims to do is, and the changes that we're making, is to say it's never okay to share harmful materials with a child, no matter what you're doing. Unfortunately, we do have to write in law enforcement and judicial, because those purposes unfortunately do happen in society where they have to investigate crimes against a child. But I just couldn't think of another reason why anyone should be shielded from the law for sharing harmful materials as defined in the penal code.
And what kind of, I guess, so I'm assuming that, what kind of harm would a child suffer? Was it more like emotional trauma? I'm assuming,
I mean, I think
right?
that I don't have the studies with me at the moment, but I mean, there are studies that show that pornographic materials and other harmful materials have a negative impact on the brain, and in particular, a developing brain. And I think, science very well understands that a female's brain's not fully developed until 21, and a male's brain until about 25, some would say later. But I do believe that these types of materials cause harm, irrevocable harm, to a child, and that's why it's against the law in the penal code for any other member of society to share these materials with a child. And unfortunately, for the last 50 years, we've exempted a few folks, but that ends today.
But I mean, there does have to specifically be an intent, right? That the person knows, hey, this material is like you said. I mean, I forget some of the language that you use. I guess meets those prongs, and they have to know, right, that it is, material that is very inappropriate for a minor, right? Maybe they're just being creeps, like you said. So they have to knowingly do that, right? It wouldn't be something that's done, accidentally. Like, let's say a child goes into a bookstore, right, and they wander into the adult section and they pick up, I don't know, a book, and they start looking at it, and maybe it's, has, I don't know, something in there that is meant for an adult, not porn, not anything like that, but just something that's, right, just meant for adults to read. Would the bookstore would they be liable for that?
I think if they're going to
it wasn't intentional, though.
I think if they're going to have something that meets the criteria of this law, that they should do everything in their power to protect children from that material, from accessing it.
Well, isn't that the parents' responsibility? I mean, if you're going to
At a commercial
bookstore-
business?
Yeah.
Every
time I've gone to a bookstore, I mean, all the areas are labeled, right? Children, adult, young adult, and so if a child is, hey, parent tells her child, hey, you can only be over here in the kids section, and the child wanders off, and mom looks, somewhere another part of the store, the parent, if the parent doesn't want their child, wandering off, well, then keep an eye on your child. It's not the responsibility of the bookstore
parents
to
should keep an eye on their
kids.
children in public places, that's for sure. I mean, we've got a human trafficking issue in the state as well, so certainly sign on for that. But what I will tell you is that it's not just the adult section, and I think we all know that. I think that we all know that these things have made their way into the kids section, and more importantly, these things have made their way into the public school system, where the parent's not allowed to be present, where children are taken into the school library without their parents being present and could potentially have access to harmful materials, and that's got to stop.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's different if someone is, they're an adult is showing a kid, I don't know, books or, whatever, right? Visual, any kind of visual that is very inappropriate. That's one thing, right? I mean, we can all agree with that
Yes.
that is not appropriate. But when it's not with the intention to do that, I just don't think that it's, I mean, I think that responsibility falls on the parent to watch your child, make sure that your kid's not checking out inappropriate books.
Assumes that every parent knows
that's the
about
parent's
every
job.
child.
It's not the government's job to raise somebody's kid.
Well,
right?
I mean, these are government-funded books at a government-funded school where the parents are not allowed to have access, and parents are busy working a job and raising their family. They can't possibly know every book that's in the library. I went down that road in Frisco ISD where they tried to put it on me as a parent to have to fully understand every single library book that was in the library, and then challenge the ones that I felt were inappropriate, when in fact the standard should have been on the school district to say, no, we're not going to allow harmful materials into our libraries and onto the bookshelves first. Parents, you should be able to trust that this harmful material is not there in the first place.
I mean, again, I feel like that when somebody says harmful, right? I mean, to me that's subjective, right? And to a certain degree.
Supreme Court precedent.
I'm saying, but to a
that's
certain
pretty
degree,
specific.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Well,
remembering
and
some previous discussions from last session as well, right? I mean, that varies from across the board.
I think the acceptable standards will vary from parent to parent, so I do agree with that. But in terms of the law, this is existing law that's been on the books for a very long time, and it is existing Supreme Court precedent, some of which has been there for 70 years.
Well, but at the end of the day, it's like we know what kinds of books that people are really targeting when it comes to this. But one last question for you.
Yes.
Why I saw here too that you also removed, and I guess this is in the let me see, hold on, it's in a second. Why remove the governmental part of it?
Again, we got specific on judicial or law enforcement, and I didn't believe that there was really any other reason why any other adult should have to show harmful materials to a minor or participate in some kind of sexual performance of a child.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Weiner, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for some
Does
questions?
the gentleman yield for questions?
I do.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Patterson. We've got to quit meeting like this. So I wanted to dig in a little bit more to these underlying definitions around harmful material.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Weiner, for what purpose?
I move to extend the gentleman's time.
Is there
fine.
objection?
Yeah, we-
Chair is none. Time's extended.
So Representative Patterson, I wanted to dig into this definition of harmful material. And as Representative Gonzalez said, she's not concerned with the sexual performance by a child, language you're changing. I'm not either. But I think we do have some concerns around the harmful material to minor changes. So under current law, harmful material means material whose dominant theme taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest of a minor in sex, nudity, or excretion. B, is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole, with respect to what is suitable for minors. And C, is utterly redeeming without social value for minors. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is it your understanding that this language mirrors long-standing Supreme Court precedent?
That is correct.
Okay. And is it your understanding, Representative Patterson, that for material to be considered harmful under the statute, all three subsections, A, B, and C, prurient interest, patently offensive, and without social value, have to be satisfied?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And in terms of C, utterly without redeeming social value for minors, is it your understanding that that requires the particular material, whether it's a book, piece of art, et cetera, to be looked at in its entirety?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I don't necessarily want to push you on exactly what you think meets that standard or doesn't with books, but I do want to ask about one particular book, and that's the book The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Have you heard of that book?
I'm familiar.
Have you read it by any chance?
I've read excerpts,
You've read excerpts.
unfortunately.
Are you aware that the book is about 226 pages long?
I'll believe you. It's probably why I didn't read it.
There are great audiobooks now, Representative Patterson. I'd recommend it. Are you aware that there are references to sexual activity on only 5 pages of the book total?
I'm not aware of the number, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. So is it your belief that a book that is 226 pages long with fewer than 5 pages that have any reference to sexual activity, and let's presuppose, I'm not going to ask you to go to bat for Toni Morrison, but presupposing the rest of the book does have valuable content, is it your understanding that a book such as that would qualify as harmful material under the statute right now?
I mean, if you're asking for my opinion, which I believe is what you asked, is that I think it's a vile piece of work, and I don't believe that it belongs in our public schools. If you want to put it somewhere publicly where parents can access it, that's fine. But I don't believe that it belongs in our public schools.
So that is not my question right now. My question is, do you think that me as a parent, because this book does not exclude this bill, these affirmative defenses don't exclude parents. Do you think if I as a parent handed The Bluest Eye, or a book matching the description I've seen, because I know you haven't read Bluest Eye, do you think if a parent takes that book and gives it to their kid, they're violating this statute and could be prosecuted?
If you could read excerpts from the book, I think it would help me better understand what we're dealing with here.
Well, I think the issue we're dealing with is if you have this test, as we've laid out, as we discussed, includes material that is utterly without redeeming social value for minors. And so what I'm positing, if you have a book with 220 pages that have redeeming social value, and there are 5 pages with something that arguably on its own might qualify, my understanding is that would not pass this test. Do you agree?
Well, I don't think that that's the way that this would work in practicality. I think in practicality, someone would actually review the materials and determine whether or not it fit. I mean, you're asking me about a book that I read a couple of excerpts on 3 years ago and fought locally, and quite frankly, I can't even remember the excerpts by now. But so I think in practicality, the way that this would work in the real world is that someone would actually read that material and make a judgment on the whole work as is required here, which, by the way, is why we didn't use this definition in the Reader Act, because I didn't believe that it should be taken on the whole. I believe that if a book has one single sentence that is perverse and harmful to a child, that it should be removed from a public school setting. So I can't answer your question.
I know, but we're not talking about the public school setting right now. We're talking about this bill you've proposed today. And the question I have is and let's take Bluest Eye specifically out of it for a minute. Let's say you have a piece of literature that is 300 pages long. 299 of those pages none of us would argue about and would argue have redeeming social value. And one page we might argue about. Would that work being given to a minor potentially constitute an offense under this section?
Well, I think, in my view, how much material is appropriate if it's considered harmful to a child? Is 5 pages too much? Is 1 page too much? Is 1 sentence too much? Is 1 graphic image too much for a child to read? But what I will tell you is that in Miller versus California in 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that a lack of value is evaluated from the lens of the work taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. That is the existing Supreme Court precedent.
And so it is your understanding under this statute that they would have to look at the work as a whole and could not pull out one thing and have that one thing outweigh everything else in the work.
Well, I mean, my belief is that one single thing could outweigh the work as a whole. But, if you're asking me about existing Supreme Court precedent, I just read you the quote, which is, quote, "The work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, and scientific value." And what I would submit to you, my opinion as one person, as one parent that has fought this issue for years and years, is that I can't possibly see anything that contains harmful material that would have any, quote, serious literary value to a child. I just can't. I don't care if it's a coming of age story. I don't care if it's a graphic novel. I don't care if it's 1 page out of 500. I cannot for the life of me understand how anyone would take that as a serious literary value for a child. I just don't.
Representative Patterson, I'm struggling here because on one hand, you're basically answering my questions with a yes, and then at the same time, you're answering with a no. And
That's how
so
I got this
I'm trying to understand how you actually understand this harmful material definition.
Well,
because on one hand, you're saying, yes, you believe it's controlled by the Supreme Court decision, which says that 200 pages of material with social value can outbalance 5 pages that are maybe more challenging. But then you're verbally saying you don't think that could work that way.
Well, I don't sit on the Supreme Court.
So which is it? Are we following the Supreme Court or not?
Well, the laws of this state and the laws of the United States follow the Supreme Court until they're challenged and overturned.
I sure wish they always did. Representative Patterson, the reason I asked about Bluest Eye specifically isn't just because it's been a lightning rod in a lot of conversations and isn't just because Toni Morrison is such a decorated author who has a Pulitzer Prize, a Nobel Prize, a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Goodness knows how many times she's been part of Oprah's book club. It's also because her book, Bluest Eye, was part of a criminal complaint filed in Hood County against a school librarian. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of that?
I wasn't, but I can't say that I disagree. If I could have I should have probably filed a criminal complaint when I found genderqueer in public libraries, not only in my district, but across the state, that had graphic images of 2 boys going down on each other. That should have been never allowed on the shelves in a public school with children to have access to it, just like many of these books should have never been allowed to be in a public school with children to have access to them.
Your book is not, this bill is not about library standards, correct?
You're making it about library standards.
No, I'm not. I'm asking about
You're asking me about
criminal
books.
standards.
Members, please refrain from talking over one another so everybody can hear your debate.
Representative Patterson, I'm hoping we can stay on this bill and not your HB 900 from last session.
You're
not
asking me
anything
about
else.
books.
No, and I'm not asking about school library standards. I am asking about prosecutable offenses that potentially put people in prison.
Let me be very clear. If you provide that material to a child, you should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We will start protecting children from this material in Texas starting today and the day that Governor Abbott signs this bill into law.
Representative Patterson, does this section of code contain an affirmative defense for parents?
No.
Do you believe parents should be prosecuted for handing pieces of literature to their children that they believe are appropriate for them?
If any person shows harmful materials as defined under this law to a child, they should be prosecuted. If a parent wants to abuse their child, they should be prosecuted. If a priest wants to abuse their child, they should be prosecuted. If a teacher or a school bus driver or the guy at the filling station, they should be prosecuted.
Gentleman's time has expired. Anyone wishing to speak on for Mr. Toth for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
The gentleman's time has expired. There was first extension of time. A second one would require unanimous consent.
Seek an extension of time.
Mr. Toth, I do hear an objection. Time is not extended. Anyone wish to speak on, for, or against Senate Bill 412? Ms. Zwiener in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. I find this a very complicated piece of legislation to sit up here or stand up here and speak against. And that's because if we followed the letter of the law every single day in this state, Representative Patterson's bill would do no harm. Unfortunately, there is a very active effort in the state of Texas right now to drum up fear against books and to pursue people for providing books that do not meet any legal standard of obscenity, either obscenity for adults or for minors, as though they were criminals. Members, a deputy constable in Hood County named Scott London followed 3 librarians around the school for months in Granbury ISD, looked at what books were on the shelves, looked at whether or not they were provided to students, and spent months functionally harassing these teachers, even though not a single thing about those books meets the constitutional standards for obscenity for minors. Not a thing. But that being unconstitutional, that being against the law, did not stop him from making those librarians' lives hell. It was wrong. It was state-sanctioned harassment. And that harassment culminated in him filing a criminal complaint.
Mr. Toth, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for
Does the
questions?
gentleman yield for questions?
Not at this time.
Not at this time, Mr. Toth.
A criminal complaint against these librarians who were just trying to do their job and educate students and turn them into avid, voracious readers, just like every single one of us should want our children to be. Now, luckily, the DA in Hood County did the right thing. He took those charging documents and he tossed them away because he was wrong. Because the deputy constable was wrong and he was operating outside of his authority. But this legislation is designed to make those librarians and educators more afraid. And it's designed to further the lie that our librarians and teachers are trying to harm our students. Members, think back to your school librarians. I remember mine. Did they ever try to cause you harm, or did they just encourage you to learn and read and grow? We all know what sort of people are working in our schools. Let's not put a target on their backs, which is what the goal of this legislation is. And members, you heard the author of the bill up here. He did not provide a straight answer on whether this legislation should be used to target Nobel Prize-winning works of literature being offered to our students in our schools. Remember, that's not just a problem because some of us enjoy those books. It's also a problem for our students to be prepared for the AP test and to succeed in institutions of higher education. This legislation is about bringing fear down on educators. And members, you've all heard from educators in your districts about their various concerns and why people are leaving the profession. There's many reasons, but one of them is that we set them up to be harassed. One of the reasons they are leaving the profession is because we keep bringing culture wars to our schools and making it harder for them to do their jobs, which is just to educate kids. So members, I urge you to vote no on this bill. Vote to protect our libraries and educators from rogue law enforcement and
Mr.
prosecutors who want them to be harassed
Mr.
and want
Toth,
them to
for
be
what
afraid.
purpose?
Gentlelady to yield.
Does the gentlelady yield for questions?
I yield.
She yields for questions.
Thank you. Ms. Weiner, you seem pretty committed, pretty concerned about librarians. Do kids matter?
Kids absolutely matter, and kids are substantially
I didn't
better
hear you mention one thing about kids
off.
while you, in your what you
Please
just
don't
shared.
interrupt me, sir. Kids are substantially better off if they have the access to a wide-ranging world of books. I mean, one of the things that concerns me so much about books like The Bluest Eye being targeted is that's a book that supports students who are learning to navigate racism in their own lives.
Ms. Weiner, do
who
you
are
believe-
learning to
do you-
understand what racism looks like if they don't experience it themselves, and learning what sexual violence within a family can look like. Many of the books that get targeted again and again are books that depict sexual assault. And there is nothing I want more than for our young people to be exposed to what sexual assault can look like so they
Ms.
can
Weiner,
avoid
so
it,
you're-
so they can avoid it, so they can
Ms.
support
Weiner, you're
their...
supposed to be answering questions. You're
I
not
am
here. You're not here to filibuster.
Would you like the front mic, Representative Toth? Because you're not letting me
I'd
finish
like
answering you.
I heard your answer.
I'm not done answering. Well, I was almost hoping we might have ruined the microphone and maybe that would kill the bill. So what I am saying is our kids need books where they learn about sexual assault without experiencing it in their real lives. I hear about protecting kids all the time. Being a minor did not protect me from being sexually assaulted when I was 17. And having access to material that shows that people get up the next day and continue with their lives is important for survivors. Having material
Weiner,
that shows
is the
the
amount of
harm
sexual
that
assault
I
in our-
am not done, Representative Toth. Having material that shows our students that what sexual assault looks like so they don't further it, so they develop empathy to respect the choices of others, so they support their friends who experience sexual assault, and so that they learn warning signs for how to avoid abusers. Those are important, and that helps our kids every single day.
Ms. Weiner, you don't believe that pornography is harmful to young children?
What I am speaking about is not pornography. There is no pornography in our public school libraries or in our
have you read
municipal
Fun
libraries.
Home? Have you read Fun Home?
I have not read Fun Home,
Okay,
but I
Fun
have
Home
read.
has-
But I have read a sequel book by the author,
I tell you
and
about
it did
Fun Home?
not contain any pornography.
Can I tell you about Fun Home?
You may.
Fun Home was in Conroe Independent School District, my district. And it was protected by the prior board. And it's a picture of two girls giving each other oral sex. Is that pornographic for two girls to give each other oral sex? Is that appropriate for little kids to see?
We evaluate material for
Is that
pornography
appropriate?
standards.
Is it
You asked me
appropriate? Is
two
that
questions.
pornographic
I'm
to
answering
you?
the first one. What is pornographic has to fall under 3 tests. Nobody is going to look at paintings by Manet like Olympia that show
This-
a nude
this
woman
isn't a painting.
and say that's pornography, even if the exact same image in a Playboy magazine might be. Context matters. And so we have to look at that 3-pronged test. Whether or not it belongs in an individual school library is a determination I won't say without the book in front of me, and it's going to depend on the individual schools. This book is not about how books are selected to be in our school libraries. It is about whether or not we should subject people to jail time for handing people books, and whether or not we harass librarians and teachers using law enforcement out of providing books
How
that are
about
completely
Lillian
appropriate.
Duncan? Have you read Lillian Duncan?
I have not read Lillian Duncan.
Okay, Lillian Duncan, to your point earlier, you had stated on the bluest, what was the other one you?
The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison.
Right, and how very little sexually explicit material is in like a couple pages, I think you said. Lillian Duncan, the problem with it is that in the back of the book, there's a how-to guide from the Trevor Project. Are you familiar? I'm sure you're familiar with the Trevor Project, aren't you?
I am familiar with the Trevor Project and grateful for all the work they do to try and prevent suicide among the LGBTQ
So
community.
you think it's appropriate for adults to be able to counsel children that are transitioning, that should be talking to their parents about it, but instead it takes you to a website
Representative
where,
Tucker, yeah.
let me finish my question, where it takes you to a website where you're instructed to put your cursor over a kill switch so that if your mom or dad walks up, it will take you to the prior website that you were at. You think that's appropriate to hide from parents?
Representative Toth, this book is about obscenity, and I don't think your question has anything to do with obscenity.
It's clearly about
The
obscenity.
gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Little in support of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to try to bring the temperature down a little bit and talk about just the legal aspects of this bill, which I think are very important for you to consider. With great respect and consideration for my esteemed colleague, Representative Zwiener, this is not a complex bill. It is a very simple bill. It's 2 pages long. One of the sections dealing with the revocation of affirmative defenses deals with sexual performance by a child. As a lawyer, it is very difficult for me to understand how a legislature in the past implemented or wrote into law affirmative defenses to sexual performance by a child that included bona fide educational, psychiatric, or other governmental purposes besides judicial and law enforcement. It simply makes no sense. It never should have been there. I understand that a lot of our discussion so far has revolved around harmful content and what constitutes harmful content under Texas law. Respectfully, that is not the purpose of the bill. And one thing I want you to consider is, should there ever be an educational, a scientific, or psychiatric or psychological reason to display harmful content for a child? And I would contend that the answer to that is no. There should never be a reason for that. It is called harmful content for a reason, because it is harmful. Representative Zwiener expressed concerns that this is going to put teachers or librarians in fear. And ladies and gentlemen, I would submit to you humbly, teachers and librarians that intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly expose children to harmful content should be in fear in the state of Texas. I know there is extreme concern also from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that Nobel Prize winning literature should be offered to children. And I think, of course, in most situations it should. However, there are situations where unbelievably accomplished authors such as Toni Morrison will have written pieces of literature, and that's what they are, pieces of literature that are not appropriate for a school-aged child. And I think we as reasonable people should agree that certain works of literature are too mature for children to be subjected to in schools. As accomplished as those authors are, and as important as those works of literature are, they shouldn't be exposed to children in schools. Representative Zwiener in our chamber here expressed concern that we need to, quote, I had to write these words down because I was shocked that they came out of her mouth, show children what sexual assault looks like. That is not the purpose of a school. It is not the purpose of a school in the state of Texas. It should not be the purpose of a school anywhere in the United States of America. We have written many bills this legislative session about sexual assault. I have co-authored and joint authored many of them by many of you in here. There are important changes that have been made to the law by Representative Johnson, Representative Howard, many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And there is an appropriate time and place to make changes to the law about sexual assault. Educating people through pictures of sexual assault in a school is a bridge too far, and I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will agree. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Bowers in opposition to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I rise not just as a legislator, but as a lifelong advocate to education, equity, and truth. At the heart of every school and every community, there stands a librarian, not just as a keeper of books, but a cultivator of curiosity. The job of a librarian is to broaden the minds of our children, to introduce them to worlds beyond their own, to affirm their identities, challenge their assumptions, and ignite their imaginations. When we threaten that role, when we criminalize librarians for simply doing their job, we are not protecting children. We are limiting them. We are silencing diverse voices. We are censoring history, and we are sending a chilling message to the very people we trust to educate and empower the next generation. So let me be clear. Protecting children does not mean shielding them from reality. It means giving them the tools to understand it, to navigate it, and to grow into compassionate, informed, and engaged citizens. Librarians deserve our respect, they deserve protection, and our children deserve access to the full truth of our shared humanity, not a filtered version that excludes, erases, or shames. Thank you.
Please excuse Mr. Lambert because of important business on motion of Mr. Ashby. Is there objection? Chair is none, so ordered. Mr. Verdell in support.
Members, thank you for your time. I'll be quick. This isn't about Republican or Democrat party politics. This is about doing what's right for the children. Every single one of us have a duty to stand up and protect the children of the state of Texas. I just had somebody send me the images of what's in that book. It is the most vile, disgusting stuff you will see, and no kid should ever be subject to that, and no person here should vote nay on that. I would appreciate your support on this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan in support of the bill.
Thank you. Sorry, members, I'll be quick as well. I want you to ask yourself before you vote, are the morals in this country going up or down? If you think they're going down, then there are changes we need to make to help our children. You can't unsee the images that are in these books. You can't unread these words. And so for that reason, I ask you to please vote for the bill. Thank you.
Ms. Pearson in support.
Members, this is not about librarians, it is about children. And as a mother, I will ask you all to go to this book on page 8485, The Bluest Eye by Tom Morrison, the book in question of this entire debate. And I would like for you to read the pages 84 and 85 and ask yourselves if this is a book that you would like your own children to be read to and provided to without your knowledge. Please vote for this bill.
Mr. Patterson to close.
Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Turner, for what purpose?
Please, gentlemen, yield for some questions.
Gentleman yield for questions.
Be happy to.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you, Representative Patterson. Your bill removes several purposes, including educational. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Are you aware that concerns have been raised by educators in the state that the bill could have sweeping consequences, perhaps unintended consequences that could impact classroom instruction in our state?
No,
You're not aware of those concerns?
I don't believe that there are concerns about that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you. We have some background music, and I'm looking at a document that Association of Texas Professional Educators put together that we had in State Affairs when we heard your House bill. There's concern that literature such as The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, and I could think of several other Shakespearean plays, Hamlet, Taming of the Shrew, and others, that could be viewed through the lens of this legislation as being obscene or otherwise harmful to children because of sexual imagery, mature themes, etc. What would you say to those concerns?
I would say that there is no concern that any adult could have if they don't plan to show harmful materials to a minor. My mom taught school for 38 years, Representative Turner, 38 years she spent in the classroom. My wife's a public school teacher now and was before she took a 13-year break to raise our children. I don't believe that the 99% want this material in their schools. I understand the big teachers unions and who they're run by and what their position is. I do not believe that teachers want this material in schools.
Okay. So you're saying you don't want, and 99% of people do not want the Scarlet Letter taught in schools?
No, I'm talking about materials that would be defined under this bill as a harmful material.
Well, so that's the essence of my question, Representative Patterson, is as defined in the bill, it is broad and it's expansive.
I don't believe so.
And I understand the types of materials that you're targeting. You've communicated that very clearly. So my question is not about that, though. My question is about other works, such as The Scarlet Letter, Romeo and Juliet, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and I would add, it's not just literature, it's art. So Michelangelo's David, that's nudity. So
this doesn't say that it has to contain nudity. Nowhere in this does containing nudity in and of itself. Again, we mentioned earlier, anatomy and physiology, biology, other science would not meet the standard here. That's not what we're talking about.
Well, and I appreciate that, but can you see how this is subjective?
No.
That it is you don't see that it's subjective?
I don't see that it's subjective because there's existing Supreme Court precedent, and those are the folks that are going to be arguing over this, is folks that would have to understand what is appropriate to show a child. And I would submit to you that if anyone questions whether it's appropriate to give to a child or to display to a child, that maybe they shouldn't do it. Maybe they should take a second look and say, maybe I won't give this to a child.
Sure. So what if a teacher, looks at this law, or assuming it becomes law, and says, I think this is really about the kind of books Representative Patterson was talking about, but this is pretty broad. I don't really know if I'm comfortable showing my art history in art history, showing my students a photograph of David. Could a reasonable person say that would be a concern because of the broadness of this legislation, that it could have a chilling effect, even if it's not your intent, but a chilling effect to say, I don't know if I should teach David. I don't know if I should teach The Scarlet Letter. I don't know if I should teach Hamlet.
I think that teachers every single day as a part of their job make decisions on what to present to their students and not based on a wide array of criteria, including what is age appropriate to show their audience.
Well, unquestionably, they do, and I think by and large they do a very good job of that. But what they do is very much informed by the laws that we pass in this legislature. And if we say they can't do something, they can't do it. And
That's right. Or they shouldn't.
And correct. If whether I support a law or don't, if it's the law, people should follow it. But that gets to the point of my concern. And my question is, this legislation could be interpreted to say literature that depicts sexual themes, adult themes, nudity, as in the case of David, to say, you know what, we're just not, we don't think that's allowed to be in the classroom anymore, so we're not going to teach that. I mean, is that a fair concern?
I think any teacher that has something of, quote, adult themes should absolutely think twice before showing it to minors, 100%.
Well, you would agree the Scarlet Letter is very much adult themed.
You know, I'm 42. It's been a while, so I'll have to check that one out.
It's been a while for me too, but I read that in my American literature class, sophomore year of high school, so I was 15 or 16 years old. You know, and it is very much adult themed. It's about it's about a woman who has an affair and is branded literally with the scarlet letter A for her sin, and so that is unquestionably, you would agree that's an adult theme, right?
I mean, I think that we could go book by book and go through an entire library. I think it's very clear what this bill says and what the existing Supreme Court precedent is and what this entire chapter, let's come back to the bill, because we want to get lost on library books.
I'm trying to ask about the bill.
I know 20 Democrats voted for this bill yesterday because they stood up for children yesterday, and I'm proud of those votes. And what I will tell you is that it's not about individual books like what you're going to want to make it to be about. This is about materials that would be otherwise illegal to show to a child, except that they are within a school. Why would 4 walls of a government-funded school prevent someone from going to jail for showing something to a child that if you were out here on the lawn of the Capitol, you would be arrested and taken to jail for showing a child that same material? That's what this bill does. It mirrors up what everyone else in society has to live under. If you're an adult and you can't show a child this material, you shouldn't be shielded from the law if you're a doctor or a teacher or a librarian, period. This is not, we're bogging down into these individual books, and that's
and
not
Representative,
what this is.
I hear what you're saying, but the bill is not that specific. I mean, you're removing bona fide educational purpose, and
Right.
that is the root of my questions here.
Yes, because there's no bona fide retail purpose, and there's no bona fide hot air balloon purpose. There's no purpose.
I'm not following that.
There's
sorry.
no purpose in society where it's okay under the law, except currently schools, medicine, and science. Why? Why on earth would it be illegal for you in your professional job to show something to a child? It would be illegal for you to show that to a child, but if you're a teacher, you're shielded from the law. For the life of me, I can't understand that. Okay. And let's keep in mind that this bill not only deals with harmful materials, we're talking about sexual performances of a child. I know nobody at the back mic wants to talk about that, but this also deals with the sexual performance of a child. How come if I'm an educator, I am shielded from the law from showing people a sexual performance of a child? That blows my mind. How has that been on the books for 50 years?
But Representative, I understand that's what you want to talk about. That is not my question. My question is about established famous works of literature and art that I think are going to be swept up in this bill, and I don't think you've adequately addressed the concerns about that. Let me just ask you this. Is it your intent with this legislation that works such as the Scarlet Letter, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, David cannot be taught in our schools? Is that your intent?
If it is a harmful material, it has no place in our schools.
Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Finally, last question. I know other people have questions. Who's the decider here? Who's going to decide if someone's breaking this law?
Typically, when someone breaks the law, they're either a police officer or law enforcement officer sees them break the law, or they're reported to law enforcement for breaking the law. They could be arrested or they could be talked to by law enforcement, and then that's handled in the courts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jones, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
I will.
Gentleman yields for questions.
So I've been listening to this dialogue, and as a person who is a survivor of brutal rapes as a kid, me, that caused me to attempt suicide and be lonely and not know who I could talk to it about. And even, I just want to say this, when I outcried as an adult, there were people in my family who didn't believe me because it was their father or something, right?
I'm
but it
so
happened.
sorry
And I'm not
that
asking.
happened.
I'm not asking for your sympathy, but I do want to say this. Can you explain how this bill helps a child who is being abused at home and can't talk to their parents because their parent maybe supports the abuser? And do you want to answer that for me?
Yeah, let me be very clear about this bill, because I think we need to stay on the bill. This bill prevents the abuse of a child. The only exemptions for the affirmative defense left in this bill are after the abuse occurs and law enforcement and judicial officers are forced to talk to the child about the abuse. This bill stops abuse.
But what I'm saying is, I'm being abused at home. I have people who don't believe me. I want to kill myself. I've tried to kill myself, but I haven't been successful. And I don't see light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm in the library. That is a safe place for me. And I find a book that shows that you can get through this and that tells me this is how you can get through this. I just want for you to know, I believe you're denying those children that access because they don't have a safe space at home or safe people, safe grown-ups to tell them about it.
Well, let me say that I'm sorry and my heart aches for every single child that goes through that. But there are a number of resources and a number of books that deal with that and that can help children without further harming them and other children and opening them up to harmful, explicit materials that would otherwise be banned under the law. Because keep in mind, I don't see bookstores having an affirmative defense to prosecution under the current penal code. I'm not removing an affirmative defense to prosecution for bookstores in this bill. I'm removing an affirmative defense to prosecution for educators who want to show harmful materials to children, or those in the scientific community, or those in the medical community, or those that want to utilize the sexual performance of a child to a child. That's what we're removing here.
And let me say this. There are plenty of grown-ups who groom kids.
Yes.
Right? They teach kids that this is okay. Kid might not feel quite right about it.
And if you want to stop that, you'll help me pass this bill today.
And they have, no, I actually respectfully disagree with your assessment of that. Because I have a grown-up who I'm supposed to be able to trust telling me that these things are okay. The books can say, no, these are not okay.
They should say that that's not okay.
And when they do those types of things to you, that's not okay. So I think that children are being denied that. I also, I know that Rep. Bowers talked about librarians. What if there's a librarian who literally does not want to break this law?
Yes.
And the librarian reads the definition of it, and the librarian censors, goes through all the books in the library, and in good faith believes a book does not violate the law, but someone complains about that book, and now the librarian is facing criminal penalties when there was never an intention to violate the law. So in other words, we're expecting librarians to be the moral police. Is there an affirmative defense to that in this bill?
I think that there's a million different hypotheticals that we could go through today, and there's one answer. No adult has any reason to show a child harmful materials or the sexual performance of a child for any reason except if they're investigating a crime against that child, period.
And I'll end with this. My mother worked in the Texas Southern Library when I was a kid. It was her work-study job. And other than what was going on in our house, I could learn about other things in the library. I could learn about other things in the library. And all I'm saying to you is I believe this bill is well-intentioned. I understand that.
Thank you.
But I also believe that this bill is going to catch people up in something that they did not intend to break. And I'm not going to quibble about whether great works of art or paintings, because to me, I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at a kid like me who didn't have a lot of options, who didn't know where I could go to figure out anything. And even when I was an adult and I outcried, there were people who said they didn't believe what actually happened to me. And believe me, it took me a lot of counseling with professionals to be where I am today. I believe your bill is gonna put a lot of kids in a position where they can't figure out how to get out, and they may be stuck because you believe that books that could help us is somehow a danger to us, when quite frankly, it's the escape for us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I respect your opinion, and I respect this debate. And I thank you for bringing your questions forward.
Ms. Garcia, for
Mr.
what
Speaker,
purpose?
does the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Absolutely.
The
Thank
gentleman
you.
yields for questions.
Representative Patterson, is it your position that this bill will outlaw the graphic sexual imagery of books in schools?
I think based on the Supreme Court precedent that it would have to meet all three of the criteria, including the prurient interest of a minor in sex, nudity, and excretion. It's got to be patently offensive to the prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole, and it's got to be without redeeming social value for minors.
And would this include erotic poetry by chance?
I hope so, but I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that they'll look at examples and make a decision.
Okay, so would another example possibly of a book that we don't need in school be genital injury or amputation?
The scientific classes that we take will not fall. I understand where you're coming from. Again, for like the 15th time, anatomy and physiology, biology, and science classes, that's not what we're talking about here. There is no concern. I'm sure the teachers' unions want to rile everybody up and make this a concern for teachers. That is not what is covered under this bill. We're talking about harmful materials. We're talking about things that are without redeeming social value to a minor, or something that is patently offensive to the prevailing standards, not in the minor community, but in the adult community. This is much more clear than I think what you're stating it is.
Well, to speak specifically about the genital amputation, I wasn't speaking of scientifically. I was thinking more of a wife, Lorena Bobbiting her husband, a book like that. Would that be okay in school?
Look, there's a million different examples that we could see without looking at anything. I'm not going to answer hypotheticals about these things.
What about incest? Would incestual materials in a book be presented in school? Would that be okay?
Is that in schools right now? Is that what, are teachers out there concerned? I mean, if we have a lot of teachers concerned, let me phrase this in a way that's not a question since I'm at the front mic. If we have a lot of teachers concerned and cowering down under their desks because they're afraid they're going to have to put their incest materials away if we pass this bill, then we're in more of a world of hurt than I thought we were walking onto this floor today.
Yes, sir. And what about gang rape?
You know, there was a book challenged in Plano ISD that had a group of demons gang raping a woman.
Yes, sir.
I don't believe that that's appropriate in a public school.
Thank you, sir. What about cannibalism?
I mean, we can go through a million different, why don't you just read them all off and then I'll answer them as one answer.
Yes, sir. Mothers eating their children? Sexual manipulation and death? War and captivity of virgins? Menstrual and bodily fluids? All of these are all stories in the Bible, sir. And so I'm just curious if all of those stories also fall under the rules.
You know, I'm going to try to think how to answer this respectfully.
And respectfully, I have read the Bible multiple times, as you heard testimony from Representative Jones, I too am a childhood victim of sexual abuse. Matter of fact, I was 7 years old when I thought I was pregnant for the first time. So that can tell you a little bit about that. But what I'm asking
The
is...
gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, sir.
The question occurs on final passage. This is a record vote. Give everyone time to vote from their desks. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Representative Hunter voting aye. Mr. Louderback voting aye. Have all members voted? Ms. Jones voting no. Ms. Bowers voting no. Have all members voted? There being 92 ayes and 39 nays, Senate Bill 412 is finally passed.